There's an old wall clock that hangs above the reception desk in our office. It's been there longer than anyone can remember. A heavy wooden thing with a pendulum that swings in slow, hypnotic arcs and a glass face dulled by time. Its brass hands catch the faintest reflection of the ceiling lights, though they've never seemed to move quite right. When I first started working here, I didn't notice it much. It was just part of the background, one of those strange relics left behind from when the building was still new. But after months of late nights and quiet shifts, I began to realize something odd. The clock never struck 12. No matter how many nights I worked through the hours, no matter how many times I sat beneath its steady ticking, it always stopped at 1 minute to midnight. The second hand would twitch near the top, hesitate, and then simply stop. And then, at exactly 12:01, it would start again, as if the missing minute had never existed. Our building is an old government property that's been repurposed a dozen times over the decades. You can see its age in the way the floorboards creak and the paint bubbles on the walls. The ventilation hums unevenly, groaning like something alive in the ducts. At night, when most of the staff have gone home, the place takes on a different kind of silence, one filled with the faint echoes of the day that's just ended. You can almost hear the residual chatter from the upper floors, the distant footsteps fading down empty corridors. That clock was always the last sound that remained. It had a rhythm that was too precise, too deliberate, as if it were aware of every passing second and resented each one. I remember the first night I stayed late enough to notice it. I was working overtime on a set of financial audits, the kind of monotonous paperwork that numbs the brain. My coworkers had already left. The only light came from the flickering fluorescent panel above my desk and the faint amber glow of the clock's pendulum lamp reflecting off the glass. When I finally looked up at the time, the hands were pointing to 11:59. The ticking slowed, then stopped. For a moment, I thought the clock had broken, but I could still hear the faint, rhythmic creak of the pendulum moving behind the glass, slow, uneven, like a heartbeat struggling to continue. The silence in between each creak stretched longer than it should have. And then the lights above me flickered. It happened again the next night, and the night after that. Always the same way, the clock freezing at 11:59, the second hand trembling, but never crossing into 12. The pendulum kept swinging, though I could swear it wasn't in rhythm anymore. On the third night, I stood directly under it when it happened. I wanted to see for myself whether it was mechanical failure or something else. I leaned close enough to see the faint scratches on the brass rim and the dust that had gathered behind the glass. The pendulum stopped mid-swing. The hands froze. The air around me grew noticeably colder, not in a dramatic way, but in that subtle way where you suddenly notice your breath fogging. I waited. Seconds passed, though not by the clock's measure. My own watch kept moving. My phone's screen showed the change from 11:59 to 12 o'clock, but the wall clock stayed still. And then, faintly beneath the silence, I heard it. A sound like whispering. Not voices I could understand, but the texture of speech, low, uneven murmurs slipping in and out of tone, as though someone were standing just behind the wall, speaking in a language I'd never heard. I turned around, but the office was empty. Every cubicle was dark, every monitor black. When I looked back at the clock, the hands had moved again. 12:01. After that, I couldn't unhear it. Every night I stayed late, the whispers returned. Sometimes they were faint, barely noticeable over the hum of the lights. Other times, they seemed to echo from the clock itself, quiet at first, then louder, as if layered one over another. It wasn't just whispering anymore either. Sometimes it was breathing. Slow, heavy breaths that matched the rhythm of the pendulum. I tried convincing myself it was all in my head, the result of too many sleepless nights and too much caffeine. But other people began to notice strange things too. The janitor refused to clean the front lobby after 11:30. He said the air felt wrong there, and that sometimes he saw movement in the glass reflection of the clock, a figure standing where no one should be. I laughed when he told me that, but a few nights later, I saw it too. I was sitting at the front desk, scrolling through reports, when I caught movement in the corner of my eye. Just a flicker, like someone passing by the hallway behind me. But the reflection in the glass wasn't of someone walking past. It was someone standing still. The figure was faint, almost transparent, the shape of a person facing the clock, their outline distorted by the curve of the glass. They didn't move, didn't sway, didn't breathe. Just stood there, motionless, like a shadow frozen in time. I turned around instantly. There was nothing there. When I looked back, the reflection was gone. The hands of the clock had stopped at 11:59 again. That night, I stayed longer than usual, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to understand. Something about that clock had begun to infect the rhythm of my thoughts. I couldn't focus on anything else. Every sound in the room seemed to fall into its pattern. Each repetition sank deeper, until it felt like my heartbeat was matching its rhythm. Around midnight, the lights began to dim. I hadn't touched the switches. The hum of the ventilation faded into a low, droning hum that vibrated through the floor. I looked up. The clock's pendulum had stopped again. The air felt thick, almost solid, and the scent of the room had changed. No longer the sterile tang of cleaning products, but something older. Something like damp wood and cold brass. And then, from behind the clock's glass, the second hand began to twitch. It jerked backward, then forward again, then backward once more, a stuttering motion that made a faint scraping sound. The whispering returned, louder this time. It didn't sound like it was coming from the walls anymore. It was coming from inside the clock. Dozens of overlapping voices, low and desperate, murmuring in a tone that carried no emotion, only rhythm. The pendulum started swinging again, violently, slamming against its casing. I stood frozen beneath it, unable to move. The glass rattled, and for a brief second, I thought it might shatter. And then, without warning, the clock struck once. Not 12 times, just once. A hollow metallic tone that echoed through the empty building. The sound was deeper than it should have been, less like a chime and more like a bell ringing underwater. It reverberated through the walls, through my chest, through the very air. And in that sound, beneath the tone, I heard something else. A scream. Faint, distant, like someone trapped deep inside the mechanism, caught in the gears. I stumbled back, knocking over my chair. The clock's hands were spinning now, faster and faster, the glass fogging from within. The second hand blurred into a single line. And then everything stopped. The building plunged into silence so absolute it felt alive. The clock's face cleared. The hands settled again. In the days that followed, I tried to ignore the clock, though every time I passed through the lobby, I could feel it watching me. That sounds absurd, but that's the only way to describe it, like being under observation by something that understood time differently. One morning, when I arrived early, I found a note on the reception desk. No one knew who left it. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting neat but faded. It simply read, "Do not let it reach 12 again." I didn't understand what it meant until later that week. The building lost power one Friday night. A storm had rolled in, and the backup generators failed. The entire office went dark, except for the faint emergency lights glowing near the stairwells. I was alone on the ground floor. For the first time, the clock's pendulum stopped completely. No swing, no creak, no sound at all. I could hear rain hammering against the windows, thunder rolling through the sky above. Then, in the darkness, I heard the ticking start again. Slow, measured. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It grew louder with each passing second, until it filled the room, drowning out the sound of the storm. The emergency light flickered once, and in that flash, I saw the clock's hands. They were moving. Not forward this time, backward. The minute hand spun counterclockwise in jerking bursts, while the hour hand slid slowly in reverse. The pendulum swung harder, faster, striking the sides of its case. And then, for the first time since I'd started there, the hands aligned. Straight up. 12. The instant they did, the glass face of the clock cracked. A thin, jagged line split it from top to bottom. The sound that followed wasn't a chime. It was a scream, the same muffled wail I'd heard before, now clear, piercing and close. The air around the clock shimmered, bending the light. I saw movement behind the glass, a shape. Something human-shaped, but not human. Its outline flickered like smoke pressed against glass, hands reaching outward, palms flat against the inside. The surface bulged faintly, as if the thing behind it was trying to force its way through. The whispering returned, no longer faint, but deafening. Layers of voices overlapping in languages I couldn't comprehend. I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, soaked by the rain and shaking from the cold. When I finally looked back, the building was completely dark, except for the faint glow of that clock's face through the glass doors. Its hands were frozen. At 12:01. They replaced the clock a week later. The new one is modern, digital, silent. But sometimes, when the office gets quiet at night, I can still hear the faint, rhythmic ticking from behind the wall, as if the old one never left, just sank deeper into the building's bones. And every now and then, when I pass through the lobby at midnight, I catch a reflection in the glass panel near reception. Someone standing perfectly still beneath where the old clock used to hang. Watching. Waiting. For it to strike 12 again. There's something unnerving about an office after hours. When the last footsteps fade down the hallway, when the fluorescent lights hum against the emptiness, and when the air conditioning sighs like something alive, the building becomes different. You can feel it. The quiet isn't peaceful. It's heavy. Watching. I've worked in the HR department of a mid-sized insurance company for nearly 6 years. I handle records, mostly attendance sheets, employee forms, things that would bore anyone else. But I've always liked the order of it. The way each day is recorded, each name checked, each absence explained. It's a kind of quiet rhythm, an assurance that everything and everyone is accounted for. Or at least, that's what I used to believe. Then came the night I found the last entry on the attendance list. It started with an audit. Our department was asked to verify old attendance records from the previous decade, boxes of dusty paper files stacked in the archive room, tucked away on the lowest floor of the building. Most of it had already been digitized, but there were still a few stubborn years missing from the system. It was a thankless job, but someone had to do it. The archive room wasn't much to look at, a long, narrow space lined with metal shelving, fluorescent lights humming faintly overhead. The air was colder down there, too cold for comfort, and carried the stale scent of old paper and mildew. The concrete floor was always slightly damp, though no one could ever explain why. The records were stored in heavy cardboard boxes, each labeled with a year. I started with 2013, yellowing sheets, attendance logs written by hand before everything went digital. The handwriting varied from page to page, as different supervisors filled them out, but the pattern was always the same: names, dates, check marks, signatures. Until I reached the final page of one binder, and saw the name. It was written in neat, block letters, more deliberate than the rest. Marianne Hollow. The date beside it was November 14th, 2013, and next to her name was a check mark. Present. Nothing unusual about that, except There was no record of a Marion Hollow anywhere in the system. No ID number, no file, no trace in payroll, benefits, or employee logs. At first, I assumed it was an error. Maybe she'd been a temp or intern whose information was never entered properly. But something about the name felt wrong, out of place. The paper itself was different, older, more brittle, as if it had been exposed to moisture before being placed in the binder. The ink was faded unevenly except for her name, which looked darker than the rest, as if written more recently. I decided to make a note of it and move on, but when I closed the binder, I noticed something else. The faint outline of another name written underneath hers. Like something had been erased or covered over. I didn't think much of it until the next night. I was working late again, long after the others had left. The archive room seemed quieter than usual, as if the hum of the lights had softened somehow. The air felt heavier, the kind of stillness that makes every sound sharp. The shuffle of paper, the scrape of a chair, the faint echo of your own breathing. As I went through the next stack of attendance sheets, I began to notice her name again. It appeared randomly, on logs from other months, other years, always near the end of a list. Always checked present. But never once did her name appear in any official record. I even searched the old employee directories. Nothing. And yet, in the attendance logs, she was there, as though someone had been quietly adding her name to every final page. The handwriting was always slightly different, as if whoever wrote it was trying to imitate others but never quite getting it right. The more I looked, the stranger it became. Every list that included her name ended on the same date, November 14th. Different years, different departments, but always that date. By the third night, I couldn't shake it from my mind. I stayed even later, determined to trace the origin of the first mention. The deeper I went into the shelves, the colder the air became. The overhead lights flickered faintly, buzzing in an uneven rhythm. I eventually reached the farthest corner of the room, where the oldest records were kept, files from before I even joined the company. The boxes there were thick with dust, their labels faded beyond recognition. When I opened the first one, a wave of stale air hit me, thick with the scent of rot and damp ink. Inside were more attendance logs, some typed, others handwritten. I scanned through them quickly, half expecting to find nothing. But there she was again. Marion Hollow. The earliest record I could find was from 1998. And again, the same pattern. Her name written last on the list, checked present, dated November 14th. I felt something twist inside my chest, that strange recognition of something impossible. No one could have worked here for 15 years without a trace in payroll, ID records, or tax filings. But there she was. Always the last name. Always there. As I turned the page, something odd caught my attention. The next sheet was blank except for one thing, a faint smudge near the top, like the trace of an erased name. The paper beneath it was damp to the touch, though there was no sign of water anywhere else. The overhead light flickered, buzzing louder. And then faintly I heard it. A sound like paper rustling from behind me. I turned quickly, expecting to see a loose stack or a draft from the vents. But the air was still. The shelves stood motionless, shadows stretching long against the far wall. Then the sound came again. Closer this time. Not like papers shifting. Like footsteps. Soft, uneven steps moving slowly across the concrete floor. I froze, listening. The air grew colder. My breath fogged faintly in front of me. When I finally turned, there was no one there. But the attendance list in my hand had changed. Her name, Marion Hollow, had been rewritten. Darker this time. And underneath it, a new word had appeared. Here. I dropped the sheet and stepped back, my pulse hammering. The sound of the falling paper echoed longer than it should have, like the air itself was holding the noise before letting it go. When I bent down to pick it up, the page was blank again. Every name, Every mark. Gone. Just empty lines and faded grid lines where ink had once been. That was when I heard the voice. Not words exactly, more like a single breath forming in the dark. A low exhale that carried weight, like it had traveled a long distance. The light above me buzzed, flickered once more, and then went out completely. The only illumination came from the faint glow of the exit sign near the stairwell. In that half-light, I saw something at the far end of the aisle. A figure, standing perfectly still between two shelves. It wasn't a shadow, though that's what I first thought. It was the outline of a person, thin, slightly hunched, head tilted as though studying me. The darkness seemed thicker around it, as if the air was folding inward. I couldn't move. The sound of paper began again, hundreds of pages rustling all at once. The boxes on the shelves trembled slightly, lids shifting. And then, one by one, sheets began to slide out, fluttering through the air like dead leaves, landing on the floor between us. Every one of them bore the same words. Marianne Hollow present. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the stairwell, slamming the door behind me. My breath came out ragged, the echo of footsteps following me long after I'd stopped moving. I didn't look back. I told myself I imagined it, that fatigue and the eerie stillness of the archive room had played tricks on me. But the next morning, when I came back with a co-worker, the floor was spotless. The papers were gone. The boxes were neatly stacked again. Except one. A single attendance sheet lay on the table near the entrance. Fresh paper. Recent ink. Date, November 14th, 2023. And at the bottom of the list, beneath my name, was hers. Marianne Hollow present. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, strange things have started happening. Sometimes when I enter the office early, I find new attendance sheets waiting on my desk, blank, except for a single faint check mark near the bottom line. Other times, I hear paper shifting in drawers that haven't been opened in years. Once, I found a file folder labeled M, hollow in the HR cabinet. Inside was nothing but a single sheet of lined paper with one word written in neat, deliberate letters. Here. I tried throwing it away, but it always returns, slipped between reports, tucked under forms, even appearing in the printer tray when I'm alone. Every November, the system updates its auto-generated attendance logs. I noticed this morning that the next date set for entry is November 14th. And there's already one name pre-filled at the bottom of the list. Not hers this time. Mine. My name, present. I can't delete it. The line is locked. No matter what I do, it stays. Maybe it's a glitch. Maybe not. But as I sit here now, long after everyone's gone, I can hear something from the archive room below. A faint, rhythmic sound like paper sliding against paper. And beneath it, a single steady breath. Waiting for the next entry.